All right, welcome back. Hope you enjoyed your last retreat. And so, without further ado, let us start to wrap up these 3 intrinsic proofs with ethos, or appeals to character, ethical proofs. Now, you've talked about some aspect of this a little bit with Bible class, and so hopefully they'll overlap and sound a little bit familiar, but by now you know that ethics and certainly morality, they're related, not exactly the same thing, so it may sound a little bit familiar, I hope. But ethos or ethics here are focusing not so much on morality, though there's a part of it, but really we're talking about character. All right, so as always, we'll begin with a brief little history of the idea, and then talk about the 2 kinds of ethos that we'll be dealing with for the most part here, especially as you're writing this paper, invented ethos, and situate ethos a little bit at the end, and wrap it up and talk about our next assignment here. So when talking ethos here, ethical proofs, it's important to remember that this is a factor, because not the idea is not always about the ideas or the issues themselves. Sometimes when you argue, sometimes there's not just a disagreement, but sometimes, especially in a lot of contemporary politics today, it's about the character of the person and not just the issue and the ideas themselves. It's not in a vacuum. And so sometimes that's good, sometimes it's not as good as we want it to be, but it's always an issue. So ethical proofs or character proofs that rely on the community's assessment of your character, your reputation. Sometimes that is something you create within the enterprise. Sometimes it's already set and it may be too late to do anything about it. Right? But in the classical world, ethics or character is more than just your personality. That your pattern of behavior, your personality is part of it, but certainly for the classical world, it was more than just the kinds of habits you're in right now. It's your moral standard, your self-discipline, fortitude, your reputation within the community, like who do people think of, or what do they think of when they hear your name? That is sort of your character. And in the classical world, as I said, it had perhaps more moral overtones than it does today. We certainly hear the term ethics a lot when sort of used synonymously with morality, but as you're talking about in Bible class, they're not exactly the same thing. So it's something that you can develop and work on. It's not just the sort of superficial things that you like, things you don't like, the little quirks that make up your personality. It's a deeper sort of aspect than that. Okay, it's tied into this notion that who you are, your habits, your trustworthiness, things like that, is connected to your ability to be a trustworthy source of information and whether people will believe you or not. Aristotle was more concerned with the character presented in the discourse, in the speech, for example, that people were making at the time, than your reputation and your lifestyle. So he would certainly fit in with a lot of contemporary politics today, although we certainly are seeing with right now with things like the Supreme Court nominations and all that sort of thing, past lifestyle matters to some people in some situations more than others. Right? So it's also important to know the ethos, the character of your audience. We've been saying again and again, and will throughout this whole semester, know your audience and know what they believe and who they are, what their stance is on the moral issue or things like that. And so it also ties into what we've been doing for years in English class and probably continuing to do so this year, right? These character sketches, when you analyze the character in a story, in a book, a play, it's not just the things they say, not just what they look like on the outside, but deep down, what do they believe? What do they value? And that is really the heart of character sketches and analyzing literature, and certainly for ethos for the classical world. Who are you really? What do you believe? What is important to you? What is your sense of right and wrong? Where's the standard? Where do you get that? What sort of moral instruction have you had? And so analyzing character was certainly part of this progymnosmata that students would do before they get to the thesis. And we've done that a little bit already in years past. Okay. So whether it seems fair or not, your character is a combination of what people believe about you and how you actually behave, the sort of person you present yourself to be. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, there's more to it than that. There's the person inside of me deep down that nobody sees and knows about. And that's possibly true. But especially as Christians, if you are somebody different on the inside than you are on the outside to people, that may not be as good of a thing as you might think it is at this point. There is hopefully a continuity between what you value on the inside when no one's looking, the things you really care about, the things, how you spend your free time, what your thought life is about, and how you behave in public. There should be certainly, as Christians, some continuity there. And there was, that sort of continuity was valued in the classical world as well. But more so than today, I think one important aspect of the classical world is that your true character is not just given by genetics. Certainly the classical world wasn't really too keen on genetics anyway. But it was something that you could develop by habit. The hexis, the patterns that you follow, the models that you follow, the skills that you practice, that having a good character was almost just like any other sort of skill, like learning to play the piano, becoming a good carpenter. You follow the good models, you practice the good habits, and then that will become not just second nature, but your nature, right? So in this psychological divide of nature versus nurture for the classical world, good character was a matter of nurture. And I think there's certainly some value into believing that as well today. Right? So unfortunately, we live in a world, with a few exceptions, especially in the political realm, that says, well, character matters and this because we want it to matter just for this conversation. Most of the times, in a lot of American thought, character is just sort of who you are. By the time you get to a certain magical age, that's who you are and that's who you're going to be. Or just, some parents think, well, that's just like my personality with my child, or that's just who I am. Can't do anything about it. It's just a quirk I have. That's just who I am. I can't do anything about it, which is, kind of a terrible and a lazy sort of attitude to say, especially for bad habits. I mean, if you could get into a bad habit, you could get out of a bad habit, right? And so the classical world, and I think certainly as Christians, we should believe that you can become any kind of person that there's many reasons why the Bible says several times, think about these things, dwell on things that are above, think about what is true and good and honorable, and, follow those sorts of models and become this kind of person. It's not just, well, it's too late, that's who you are, therefore you have these genetic tendencies, you have these sort of things that you prefer, you don't like vegetables or you don't like this kind of music. That's just, nothing can change. Those things can change. You can train your taste buds to enjoy different kinds of foods. You can train your ears and your aesthetic sensibilities to value different kinds of music or art or things like that. You can follow different moral role models to become a different kind of person, right? And so they would study and learn and read about great leaders of the past. In play acting, they would model good characters. There's a reason why the classical world had so many obvious sorts of moral stories with Aesop's fables and things like that, saying, be like these obviously good characters, avoid this kind of the bad kind of characters. So, and partly it's predicated on something we'd probably disagree with, certainly in light of the 19th and 20th centuries, that the notion that good people and only good people can really speak well. And because I think of so much of the 20th century and the fact that so many in the 19th and 20th century thinkers who had a classical education and then took that ability and became more sophists than, philosophers, Marx and Darwin and others, that, some of the political leaders of the 20th century who could speak well and then lead their nations to do terrible, horrible things. It's not really believed so much that good people can speak well. And so ethos, as today, has become a matter of personality and style. And so it's kind of an unfortunate situation that we are in with the issue of ethos today. But, there's ways to go about sort of redeeming this notion. And that's partly why we're doing this thing right here. So that is a brief overview of the history of character, a pretty important issue here for rhetoric.